Okay, we're on 222 and 223 in the World Wars, the fall of Berlin. So in the last weeks of World War II, farce is kind of comedy, but I don't know if I'd say comedy, mixed with tragedy. Hitler, directing non-existent armies from his bunker in central Berlin, grew increasingly shrill and deranged. Stalin, from Russia, right, was determined to take Berlin. Berlin's in Germany, whatever the cost. And millions of soldiers on all sides wondered if, having got this far, they would be the ones to die in the last great battle. Throughout late 1944, Soviet forces had been pressing west through Eastern Europe. By February of 1945, they were waiting on the River Oder, just outside Berlin, building up their strength for an assault. The Americans were close too, but Eisenhower had already decided the unexpected cost in casualties was not worth the prestige of capturing the capital. Stalin had no such scruples or feelings about it. 2.5 million men, 6,000 tanks, 41,000 guns, and 7,500 aircraft lay ready and waiting. Facing them was the tattered remains of the German army. Alongside these war-weary veterans were newly conscripted old men, and boys so young they could barely pick up a rifle, who wore helmets that were too big for their heads. As the Soviets approached, millions of Germans fled, leaving behind a shattered capital. Already ruined by bombing, it was to be further destroyed by fearsome artillery barrages and street-to-street fighting. An aura of unreality descended. Executed soldiers dangled from lampposts, hung for desertion to deter others from doing so. People staggered drunkenly through the chaos, trying to blot out the awful reality of what was about to happen. One possibly true story from this time tells that after a final performance of Wagner's Götterdämmerung, I guess that's a play, members of the audience filed past boys of the Hitler Youth who carried baskets of cyanide suicide capsules provided for them. The battle for Berlin began on April 16, but by April 24, the city was surrounded by Soviet troops. As they advanced into the suburbs, German army communication lines broke down completely. To find out how near the Russians were, officers in central command posts had to ring outlying districts via the city's public telephone network. When a voice answered the phone in Russian, they knew the end was a little nearer. So here's as smoke rises over the rubble-strewn streets of Berlin, a Russian soldier flies the Soviet flag from the roof of the German parliament right in the middle of the city. During the air invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazis had behaved with great inhumanity, it means not treating them like humans, toward both Soviet citizens and soldiers. For the Soviets entering Berlin, the lair of the fascist beast, according to Soviet propaganda, the time for revenge was at hand. Unfortunately, those who suffered most were civilians. With over 2 million Soviet soldiers now in Berlin, thousands of women who had stayed in the capital were greatly hurt. They would attack women and children. Hitler spent the last few weeks in an underground bunker in central Berlin. In a feverish, hysterical atmosphere, he found time to marry his mistress, Eva Braun. A mistress is usually not your wife or somebody like, often you have another wife, I'm not sure in this case, and to denounce the German people in an unapologetic final political testament. They had, he said, shown themselves unworthy of the faith he had placed in them. Then, in the nearest he came to taking any of the blame for the disaster he had brought his country, the most ruthless and barbaric of leaders declared he had not been ruthless enough. Afterwards, you regret the fact you have been so kind. On April 30, 1945, Hitler took cyanide and shot himself in the head. Eva Braun killed herself too. Their bodies were burned without ceremony outside the bunker. A week later, on May 8, 1945, so that is when World War II ended, with the fall of Berlin. Man, that is tough stuff.